Greetings, viewers. As some of you may know, a YouTuber, of course that being Matpat, the owners of the channels Game Theory, Film Theory, Food Theory, GT Live, and I believe he has a channel called Style Theory as well. Well, you see, he's recently made a theory video about murder drones. And oh god, that theory is horrible. So, just basically, I think everyone here knows who Matpat is. If you watch me, chances are you've watched him in his higher scale videos, but you know, his murder drones theory, it misunderstands the basic lore of the series, and currently it is my goal here to talk about every point that's incorrect and correct them to give people a better understanding of what the lore actually is. This is not a video about General Murder Drone's lore. This is merely a video correcting the mistakes he's made that'll make people get more confused. I can explain the mistakes he's made and what the actual lore in those cases is. But if you want an actual full-scale lore video, I won't have one of those up till a while after this video. But anyway, two more things I should note. I don't have a problem with Matpat. I don't want really beef, and I'm not just some clout chaser making a video against his for the sake of popularity. I am not of the opinion that all real, I guess, press, all clout is good. I'm not of that opinion. There's attention that I don't want. And to be honest, I try to make sure that if I spread my name, I try to make sure it'll be thought positively of. Here I'm simply making this video because, well, Matpat's video is blatant misinformation on so many different cases to the point where it's annoying for anyone who's actually watched the show. Another thing, I really do not see the point in it. This video is just, well, it seems from the very start that it's not genuine. It seems like he made a brief video just to get the people to stop begging him to make murder drones videos or making jokes about him making a video for the series. It feels more like that than him genuinely enjoying the show and wanting to make a theory about it. Because he never treats it like he does with any other show. He inserts random clips and is over-reliant on horrible jokes that are basically just cutaways to those scenes for it to actually be good. It's not even funny. It overall gives the impression that he's more just trying to squeeze it in for the sake of making Murder Drones fans stop bothering him rather than having an actual passion for the show. I don't even have a mic here. I'm talking normally to make a video that is going to have horribly poor audio quality circumstances where I'm 100% sure you could hear voices in the background from others near me talking if you really tried. But that's the thing. People forget that the initial quality of certain things does not matter. It's what the content means, and it's really what the creator is trying to do that matters. Matpat may have this crazy editing, this real talent for it, and he's good at wording things to fit and to overall sound really good and coherent. He also is great at really speaking like a scientist and putting out his theories in a correct fashion, which I respect heavily, but the problem is, as this video is about, it comes off as very annoying when he very clearly doesn't know what he's talking about. So, I'm gonna jump right in here after all that talking. Okay, I've become a meme I hate now. Let's jump right in after talking for 10 minutes straight. But anyway, to put it simply, he makes too many mistakes. The first big glaring one is he misunderstood how zombie drones work. Mutations, as a whole, was not referring to the absolute solver. The absolute solver is a mutation, but they're not the same thing. The absolute solver is a mutation that takes place in zombie drones because they have a damaged AI after being improperly exposed or disposed and rebooting. That damages their coding, which is why they gained the absolute solver, an AI mutation that takes control of him. He also, for some reason, treats it like a typical zombie thing, even though it's not like that at all. It's a complicated and interesting way. It's basically a form of puppeteering. The absolute solver is a sentient AI that controls them and manipulates them to a varying degree upon certain points. For example, back at the start, Uzi was just a zombie drone who happened to have absolute solver. It didn't affect her, but as she started using it more and more, it started influencing her. It had small effects behaviorally. I butchered that word. It is sad this is higher quality than Matpat's video, objectively. But anyway, it behaviorally was able to influence her. And by the time of episode 5, it's very different because she ended up becoming an admin in episode 5. Whereas we can see in episode 6, this led to every time she tried using the absolute solver, it made her immediately get possessed by the absolute solver and put her under its control. This is very different from how he describes it and how he portrays what happened to Sin. Which leads to the next things, because there are multiple errors with his chronological recount of the events in the Elliott mansion. For starters, he was right about one thing. Tessa collected the murder drones, or what in most cases later became murder drones, from the dump and repaired them in order to befriend them, because she was isolated from all human life besides her family and was basically alone. However, he got so many things here blatantly wrong, such as claiming that Tessa was the one human that treated Sin with respect, even though Tessa and Jay mutually always locked Sin in the basement and viewed her much like even Louisa and James did as an antichrist, which is really, I think you can understand just how big of a deal this mistake is. It's so blatant, and it gives off the impression that, like I said before, Matpat didn't actually even watch the show. There's just no way that someone who's watched the show can make mistakes like these. It is so blatantly obvious. It isn't even like Five Nights at Freddy's, where if you put in a lot of research, you can come to these conclusions. Granted, there are things like that in Murder Drums, but in this case, this is just stuff that's explained up front. So, it really is shocking to me how this could happen here. How this garbled version of the lore could exist. On top of that, she makes another mistake shortly later. He makes the mistake of thinking somehow that Sin spared Tessa out of just being thankful to Tessa for treating her properly, which she didn't. Tessa never treated Sin well. But the actual reason she did that was simply because Tessa was in a similar situation to her. Tessa wanted to help In, and that is of course something that benefited In. And Sin decided eliminating the Elliots aside from Tessa would be a good idea. They decided definitely gonna hear voices in this video because there's someone laughing really loudly in the next room, but I'll do what I can, try to muffle the audio or something. Anyway, after that, even despite that, it's heavily implied to have not gone well anyway, because there's this scene in a flashback in episode 4 where Sin was eating a human arm. It is very likely that Tessa actually lost one of her arms and had to get it replaced for prosthetic, and that was what Sin was, and that's the arm Sin was eating. But I will admit, this is no place for the things I'd theorize, and right now I should just stick to the blatant mistakes he's made. Anyway, in addition to this, he made a mistake about thinking that drones were only really coded with their serial numbers, and also, of course, their manufacturing model, that being the Sin variant and the Tessa variant S. But there's a lot of problems with even the classification of these models, and he also left out some things. For example, there's worker IDs and a different type of classification for the rest of the workers, such as Kelsey, whose ID is literally Kelsey in episode 3. Which, that seems like a pretty weird thing to leave out. I don't get how he makes these mistakes. I'm gonna get sidetracked here for a second, but I have one honest opinion about the whole thing. Murder Drones, it's a great show. It's goated. I love it so much. But I was never fond of people joking about Matpat making videos about it. Mainly because I knew something like this would happen. I always dreaded it because I thought, okay, Matpat is not going to make a good theory about it. This is not something he's going to care about or put any effort into. It's going to be very bad, and he'll just say it in his common, obnoxious, very arrogant voice as he explains how he's mastered the lore, when in actuality he's one of the really worst murder drone spheres I've ever seen. Again, I'm not even trying to pick a fight with Matpat for reputation. I'm just genuinely saying, what is wrong with him with this one? Nothing he said makes any sense. I dislike that he's spreading so much incorrect information on the internet and talking about how it's correct. Like, seriously. I've seen people talk about how they were lost as to the show's lore before and were confused, but he's cleared it up for them. Bro, seriously, why? If you were lost about the lore before watching his video, then you are lost now, period. Because nothing he said was accurate. I'm not one of those elitists who thinks all shows have to be complicated to be good. Nor am I the type who's going to claim that, nor am I the type who really claims, oh, this overly complicated series is actually really easy to understand and really simple. But I will say that if you put in the effort, it's very possible to understand the show. I myself would say I have a pretty good understanding of it, and I've been working to make my name known as an expert for murder drones. This big YouTuber for the community, Yagster, I actually once told him something he didn't know about the lore, and he dubbed me the murder drones expert. So, I really just do not like that Matpat is saying things that aren't true. It is ridiculous. If you don't understand murder drones lore, then I'll make an actually accurate video about it sometime. But do not take Matpat's words for 100%. I'd argue more than half of his video is wrong. At least. But anyway, back on track. Another big, glaring mistake he's made is it's that he thinks Sin, for some reason, is basically, he thinks that she's somehow still in control, even though we obviously know that's not the case. You see, in episode 5 and 6, as I had initially theorized in the old days, I was technically wrong about it, but technically right with my initial theory, because Sin was indeed the drone's name, and that wasn't S as I had theorized, but what I was right about back then was that Sin is still a name that was used to refer to the absolute solver in all those cases. Sin is the name of a drone it possesses, but Sin has been reduced to just its puppet. Sin is now used to describe the absolute solver more so than it is to actually, well, refer to Sin. She has very little will of her own, which is blatantly shown by her permanent eldritch state in episode 5, and also her very clear, different voice, which is just the Absolute Solver's voice. Back then, this is something that even I could really understand back in the day, and Matpat just does not. He later in his video backtracked and said that maybe his last reason for a possible explanation of what Sin was planning was that she's been fully taken over by the Absolute Solver, but the problem is, he said that it was not possible to actually figure out which one it was right now, which is not the case. It's blatantly laid out in front of us, not only through basic evidence that you just have to look at in the episode 5, but also in Dead End, they very explicitly state that the Absolute Solver took Sin as a host, and then it took everything. A clip that he even used in the video. I don't get how he could make mistakes like that for a scene he himself cherry-picked out of a show to put into his video. It makes no sense. Anyone who's watched the show would understand this. He's also made undeniable errors, such as saying that Khan was Nori's father, when Khan was Nori's husband and Uzi's father, and also claiming that Doll fulfills the helper role in the protagonist's journey diagram, even though she's been playing an antagonistic role the entire show and has only helped a grand total. Scratch that, she hasn't even helped once. She's said that she'd help Uzi once, but she's very clearly prioritizing her own benefit over helping Uzi in every case, as shown in episode 5, where she stole the key bug from Uzi for her own benefit, even though she knows Uzi needs it. It just, this is stuff he blatantly got wrong, and I cannot deal with it. I'm going to check the camera real quick to make sure it's still recording, because it stops every 30 minutes. I'll be right back. Alright, I'm back. I don't know if I'll have this video entirely finished today, so I'm going to have to. I might need to record the next part in a different day, but for now I'll just keep going. Who knows how long editing this will take, but anyway, when Matpat makes these obvious mistakes, it really spreads it to his giant audience. It gives people false views of the show. I'm not the only person who is furious about this, and I'm certainly not the only person who's trying to be vocal about it. But it's my hope here to really get more people to know about the truth via this video. I really am shocked that every other Murder Drones Fierce in the old days, before anything related to Absolute Solver was properly explored, it shocks me how they had so much of a better understanding of the lore back then than Matpat does now. Anyway, on to the thing about the different models of the Absolute Solver. Did I just say of the Absolute Solver? Of the drones. That is a complicated case. You see, the Sin models are worker drones that have been turned into disassembly drones by Sin around the time of episode 5. We know this because in episode 5, it was revealed that Sin was turning worker drones, such as In and their backups, into murder drones in the basement, and that she was also forcibly lobotomizing them in order to keep the other backups from actually knowing about this. That is what creates the murder drones. She twisted them into eldritch biomechanical monsters, and that's the murder drones. They are, because of this, Sin models. And having the absolute solver and using it basically forces you into a similar state over time, which is what the zombie drones are, such as Doll, Sin herself, Uzi, and Nori. The really thing is, he's pretty wrong about another part. He claims that S is likely going to be working for Tessa because S has that model, the Tessa model, but the thing is, frankly, it doesn't fit plot-wise from what we've seen. For one, that was a long time ago, and it's supposedly before they actually started with things like the Elliot Massacre in the Elliot Mansion. It's implied to be before then, timeline-wise, and supposedly in the early days of Cabin Fever Labs. On top of that, if it was afterwards, how would Tessa have a drone there that's working with her when she has no contact with the other planets, and every worker drone and murder drone, every murder drone there was deployed by Sin, and the workers she just blatantly couldn't contact. On top of this, making it unlikely that they're working together, there's also the fact that S is highly implied to be a zombie drone, or an absolute solver user, basically the same thing, and those are very contradictory things. Her being allied with a zombie drone, that just doesn't make sense. Her goal is to kill all of them, to eliminate them before they end up posing a threat to the universe as a whole. S is the reason we believe S in the community is a zombie drone is simple. In the trailer for season 1, they blatantly show a blue absolute solver symbol that isn't shown anywhere else in the actual show so far. This is a trailer for season 1, meaning that we have to see it within the next 2 episodes, with S being long overdue and specifically implied to be associated with Cabin Fever Labs. All of this is pretty consistent here with how the timeline is going. We're in Cabin Fever Labs, so S has to come soon. All in all, this means pretty blatant that the absolute solver symbol is the absolute solver of S. It's also unknown if this Tessa model is actually working for Tessa still, or that he has that model at all, given that it bare minimum takes place that note about S, bare minimum, was made back before the destruction of Earth, back before humans were wiped out in Copper-9. We don't have an exact timeline for everything here, but that was a long time before the pilot episode, and it was even farther behind the timeline, when you consider that in episode 4 there was actually a 9-month time skip from between episode 3 and 4. Because of this 9-month time skip, it is very likely that S has pretty much become like a murder drone at this point, or is at the point where Absolute Solver has a very extreme control over him. After all, we saw how quickly it started working on Uzi as soon as she actually became an admin. We saw how it's been affecting Doll and Uzi as well. All in all, it's very unlikely that they'd ever work with Tessa, and S is likely not even the Tessa model anymore, because again, the Tessa model can be presumed to be any drone that was patched up by Tessa back in the Elliott Mansion. It is very likely that Sid was just altering them to her model during those events, and because it definitely takes place before the destruction of Earth, it's almost 100% guaranteed that S has been changed as well. Another big thing is that somehow he skipped over some of the best lore, some of the most important details, such as, let's face it, the obvious one of Uzi becoming an admin, which was revealed in episode 5 via looking on N and V's visor after she frees them of Sin's control, where it says that it's assigning the permissions and that Sin and admin had been overridden, with Uzi being selected as a new admin, which is really why things happen so differently with her solver form in episode 6 than it does in episode 4. She's no longer being influenced by the little that's left of Sin. She's being controlled by the Absolute Solver itself, not just some small puppet that was just slightly higher in the thing than she was. Now she's a full-fledged admin, and the Absolute Solver is treating her accordingly. Another thing is that part of his timeline also wouldn't work at all, because he's saying that S will likely be... He's basically saying that S will likely reveal who killed Tessa. Not Tessa. Who killed Nori. Who he claims it'll be. And I don't really care about this one way or the other. I've never really cared about theorizing who killed Nori specifically. Very possible that it's in, but, just never cared about this matter. The problem here is that he implies S would know this via being in Cabin Fever Labs, which, let's just face it, S almost definitely is. But the problem really is that Nori didn't die in Cabin Fever Labs. She died because she left. She died because she was killed by a murder drone after she left. Alice even got mad in episode 6 about Nori leaving them to die. Also, N and V show no knowledge about cabin fever labs in the actual episode, which also really hammers in the nail against Nori dying in cabin fever labs, which means that if S is in cabin fever labs, they couldn't possibly know who killed Nori. Of course, there might be some random plot point where S can somehow see what happens outside of there, or see the future or something and tell what happened, but that would be very random, and frankly, let's just be honest, it doesn't matter if later on something happens that makes your theory possible. When you're making a theory, you have to have evidence that supports you in the moment, which Matpat just does not have. The evidence right now does not support him. He also made a bunch of other really annoying mistakes, such as classifying Tessa as a mentor for Uzi, even though there is very clear animosity among them. Uzi wants to kill all humans, was very clearly frustrated about Tessa being on Earth at the beginning of episode 6, and even bit Tessa's finger immediately. Meanwhile, Tessa is sent to eliminate all drones that were infected by the Absolute Solver. Every single zombie drone, which would include Uzi, whose programming is horribly damaged beyond most. That overall makes them pretty clear enemies in this, and it doesn't make it any better that Tessa has been constantly trying to convince N that he need to choose the universe over Uzi, and she blatantly refused to go back and help Uzi when they escaped Bao's little surgery room. This overall makes it pretty clear that she's no sort of mentor figure towards Uzi. If anything, the mentor figure, according to the chart, would be Dorman, because while he sucked at the beginning, he did give her a little nudge in the right direction by telling Uzi about Camp 98.7 and its relation to Nori. Speaking of which, Matpat somehow confused Camp 98.7 with Cabin Fever Labs. I mean, seriously. Who has the audacity to claim that they know the entire lore before the episodes end, and that he knows how the entire show will end, and yet he can't even get something as basic as the difference between Cabin Fever Labs and Camp 98.7 right? His evidence was in episode 4, S's documents being found in the Camp 98.7 main cabin that's presumably connected to Cabin Fever Labs. That was his evidence for S being in Cabin Fever Labs, which I agree with. The only problem is that blatantly that just wasn't Cabin Fever Labs, regardless that Uzi found it in. That was a little cabin at the top of Camp 98.7, which is an entirely different place, and is believed to be run by an entire different organization, staffed by both workers and humans. It overall definitely doesn't have any real merit to claim that just because of its location, that Cabin Fever Labs is suddenly where S is. It just fits narratively and only makes sense for S to be there regardless. On top of this all, there's just something about the way he says everything. I genuinely don't think he's watched the show at all. Something about the way he talks doesn't feel like there's any attachment to the series. He narrows down the character of everyone to few words. I get that certain characters, such as Uzi, Jay, and N, are supposed to be, in a way, archetypal, but the difference is that the point of them is that they strictly adhere to these archetypes while going beyond them and showing genuine good character beyond that, while still centering their personality in those places. Matpat does not really care about any of this or explain that properly. He just says their most base traits with zero more explanation. He also makes a lot of clear timeline mistakes, such as when explaining the events of episode 5. He uses images of the murder drones versions of N, Tessa, and Jay. Okay, I'm making some mistakes here by saying the wrong names at certain points, but at least I'm correcting it, seriously. Why couldn't he make these corrections? But he showed the murder drone versions of N, V, and J for episode 5, even though they were just worker drones at the time. In most cases with V and at the end J being exceptions, as they became zombie drones due to their programming being more damaged, while N was really, his absolute solver was blocked by Sin, so he wasn't really a zombie drone himself. Overall, Matpat just doesn't seem like he knows what he's talking about at all. Bro should have stuck to Five Nights at Freddy's. Because this is my territory. I'm the murder drones guy, and I will call out every mistake he makes here. Anyway, he also, I believe, I forgot what I was going to say, but I also don't think he's watched the show because he's very clearly skimmed over big details and only really paid attention to the minor details, which I get. Murder Drones is a show that works very hard to make even minor details vital. The events of episode 5 and Sin's admin status, as well as Tessa's character as a whole, were foreshadowed as early as episode 1 via background text on N's visor. That is a pretty big deal. But the problem is that while this big lore, as I was saying, the problem with the way Matpat does it is that he completely excludes the bigger picture and only looks at the background details. Never once has he taken a moment to actually understand or comprehend the basic plot and structure that it's going through. He's completely skimmed over the point of Uzi going completely crazy in episode 4. It wasn't just that she was going crazy from using the absolute solver. She was in a bad place mentally was having very bad thoughts due to being excluded from being afraid, being excluded from everyone else, and locking herself away for half the episode in that stupid cabin, which is in of itself a play on cabin fever, sickness from a feeling of isolation from others, and that was causing her a lot of frustration, which accelerated her overheating process, which also was accelerated by her constant overuse of Absolute Solver. And then there were other things like lights shining on her that also made her start overheating. All of her fear, all of her regret, her desire to not be essentially left behind, all that put her in a bad place mentally, and she snapped under the influence of Sin, who was currently an admin for Uzi's group and had the permissions to really mess with Uzi, and Sin influenced Uzi to go on this killing spree. Uzi needed to do that for oil to survive. And also, of course, she chose, as we see in the episode, she mainly attacked people who were actively against her and treated her as an outcast, which shows a degree of choice in who she attacked. Also, matter is, when V cut her arm off, she snapped out of it because she was afraid. But then, as soon as she couldn't talk her way out of it, and she knew V would kill her anyway, she continued fighting. That seems like a pretty big thing to just glaze over. But, of course, Matpat wouldn't look into that. He only looks at things relevant. This video is getting too long. This video is getting too long. I'm going to try to finish it next run. Well, it's about time I finally end this video. I'm gonna finish it up here. Again, sorry if you could hear people in the background. I just really don't care if I'm not in a good situation to be recording. I just care about actually getting things out there. Anyway, that's, in the end, there's a key problem. Matpat glazes over things that go against his theory that actually matter. He also, I mentioned earlier that he claimed that Doll was a helper character and that Tessa was a mentor figure. But he also completely ignored a fight in the Promining because for some reason, I guess he only recaps lore that support his theory. Or as I should say, that he can incorrectly explain to support his theory. And that leads to nonsense like this. He left out the entire prom fight where Doll very explicitly tried to kill V and N. Also that Doll explicitly tried to kill Uzi before that. They've never been on friendly terms the entire series. The closest was very, I'd say, I guess, impulsive decision on Doll's part to say that she'd help Uzi at the end of episode 3. And she never did. She's always, I get that I've explained this already, but I just seriously cannot understand why he'd say anything like that when Doll has been the antagonist in every scene she's been in. There's never once been a scene where she's been friendly with anyone. It's just ridiculous how it could dare make a mistake that big and expect it to just be ignored. I don't doubt that Doll will be redeemed in the series, especially considering in the end she's also just a puppet of the Absolute Solver like Sin. But come on. Besides the Absolute Solver itself and Sin, there really is no one who's been as big of a deal and as much of a villain as Doll. We all know that it's just ridiculous how Matpat tries to classify her. And I think I mentioned this already. It's kind of hard to remember through 40 minutes of footage, but to put it simply, he claims that S would be allied with Tessa, which wouldn't work narratively because simply it's implied he's an Absolute Solver user via the Season 1 trailer that shows a blue Absolute Solver symbol, which we've yet to see a drone with. That would mean in Season 1 they're going to introduce a new character who has the ability to use Absolute Solver, and it'll have that specific signal or symbol, which would mean it would most likely be S, who's foreshadowed and actually is supposedly related to Cabin Fever Labs in some way. And if he's an Absolute Solver user, then obviously he'd be one of Tessa's targets and would not be able to help at all. But let's say that despite this, he somehow is still allied with Tessa. He somehow can't be controlled by the Absolute Solver. He somehow is capable of helping them and resisting its effects. Let's be real for a second. That would be a complete Mary Sue, some of the worst writing ever, and would overall undo the entire threat that the characters are currently experiencing. It would feel too easy and would just be a level of bad writing that Glitch Productions is just not capable of. We've seen what Liam and Luke can do. We've seen how good their writing is. It would make no sense for any of this to actually happen, and because of that, it just really annoys me that Matpat can make a theory like this. Anyone? I think that'll wrap it up. There's more I could say, but I really don't need to make this video harder to edit and export. For some reason, Premiere Pro struggles to export files above 40 minutes. And it's already been over 40 minutes for a while now. So, just spread the word that Matpat's video is not good and should not be trusted. He makes too many lore mistakes. It's below shallow and surface level. It's not even surface level, it's just plain sky level. That is how far it gets from being deep. He makes so many basic mistakes that it is ridiculous. If I don't really care if he sees this, he probably won't, but if someone does share this with him, Well, Matpat, find your own niche. You clearly cannot do murder drones content at all. Even unhelpful commentary agrees. So, thank you for watching, everyone, and I'll be making more videos shortly. I'm probably not going to show that, but for some reason I did that salute Uzi did in episode 4 to that weird roach, not the key bug, the normal one. Anyway, I'm ending it here. Thanks for watching. Subscribe.